Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Fruitful 7. Today, we will continue our series of lessons called Lessons from the Life of King David, and we're going to dig into the next run-in, the next scuffle, if you will, between David and King Saul. Today, we're going to continue on to 1 Samuel chapter 23 and work ourselves up to where we get one of the most known and significant interactions that King Saul has with his servant David. Now, at the beginning of 1 Samuel chapter 23, we have this instance where David and his men are confronted with liberating a people in an area called Keilah. In Keilah, the Philistines were planning to ransack and overrun the people that were there. And what happens is that David actually inquires of the Lord twice to affirm that they have the go-ahead from the Lord to liberate and protect these people that were at Keilah. While these things are going on, Saul is actually making plans himself to confront David and his men so that he can overtake them and conquer them. Now, what happens from this point is something that we've actually observed very regularly with David throughout his story so far, and that's that whenever David conquers someone or liberates a people, it becomes known, it becomes news and knowledge throughout the region. And so because of that, there's an informant that King Saul has that brings him information on what David and his men have just done to liberate the people at Keilah. And so because of Saul's plans to overtake and subdue David and his men, he of course makes plans to hopefully cut them off and confront them somewhere near the area of Keilah. So, by the end of 1 Samuel chapter 23, even though Saul has plans to track down David, the Lord actually intervenes again, and Saul and the armies of Israel end up having to go into combat with the Philistines yet again. And this actually holds Saul up from catching up to David. Now, here in the story is where things start to get very interesting. By the time we get to the beginning of 1 Samuel chapter 24, Saul has gotten back to tracking David and all of his men. And so what ends up happening is that David and his men are hiding in this cave. And what's interesting is that King Saul decides to occupy the cave area where David and his men are. And it's very interesting thinking about this because the cave had to have been extensive if David and his entire force, we're assuming from scripture, were inside the cave, and Saul was also able to go in and occupy the cave as well. So what Saul ends up doing in the cave is actually taking a moment to relieve himself. He's stopping for a bathroom break. And so while David and his men are in the back of the cave, they were actually debating on whether David should take this opportunity, take this moment to subdue Saul so that everything that David has been enduring under the hand of Saul can finally stop. Now, in the end, what ends up happening is that after David and his men deliberate about what he should do in regard to Saul, David decides to honor his convictions. He talks his men down, and what David actually ends up doing is sneaking up behind Saul, we're assuming, and cutting off a piece of Saul's robe while Saul is relieving himself in the cave. And just for a moment of deliberation and kind of playing with what is happening here, these had to have been some very highly trained and disciplined men for David to have the skill to sneak up on Saul, to maybe tiptoe, if you will, up on him and take a piece of this robe, clearly showing that he had every opportunity to kill him, but he elected not to because of his devotion to his king. Now, there's a couple things that I want to point out, actually going all the way back to the beginning of 1 Samuel chapter 23, that I believe highlight David's character and highlight his devotion and his willingness to be obedient to God. In 1 Samuel chapter 23 and verse 2, we saw the first example of David inquiring of the Lord. And whenever you study scripture, you see that inquiring of the Lord is something that the Lord honors, but that's also very important because it's the way that not only David, but all of us can get permission from God or get clarity from God on how we should move forward in a given situation. And also, I believe personally that it was just very cool. It was very noble that David and God would be able to talk to one another in that way. When you read the scriptures, it says that as soon as David inquired of God, God replied to him. And that's something that I think all of us should seek to have in our personal walks with Christ. The other thing that I noticed as we get down to 1 Samuel chapter 23 and verse 5 is that David used this opportunity in the area of Keilah, not to subdue people, not to overtake them, because him and his men were a force of about 600 at this time, just over 600. And so it would have been very easy for them to do that. But instead of doing that, David, I believe, stayed true to his character, and he stayed true to what he believed the Lord would be pleased with. And he took this as an opportunity to engage with the Philistines and to liberate the people of Keilah. And although it is kind of sobering that David inquired of the Lord after this to ensure that the people of Keilah would or wouldn't give him up or turn him over to the forces of King Saul, to me, I still think it's pretty amazing that David was true to what he should do, true to doing what was upright, what is righteous, and liberating the people of Keilah, regardless of the circumstances that were surrounding it. However, that is all the time we have for this episode of Fruitful 7. The series Lessons from the Life of King David. I hope and pray that this series of lessons has been continuing to bless you and give you some insights and things to look at in scripture, especially as it pertains to the life of King David. Thank you so much for watching on YouTube and or listening on Spotify. Remember that we're going to be going through this series of lessons for the next several episodes. And we also will hopefully, prayerfully, have some surprises, some new things that we'll be doing to shake up a little bit of the content that we're putting out on this platform. And so I pray that God blesses you. If you have any comments or prayer requests, feel free to leave them in the chat section or the comment section on YouTube and or Spotify. And remember, the kingdom of heaven is at hand.